All right, we're going to do a quick lesson, hopefully, on relationships amongst organisms in ecosystems. And the first image that I'm going to show you here is one that we've done together before, way back in Unit 2. We talked about symbiosis because we talked about endosymbiosis, and we made this diagram together when we did the endosymbiosis article and questions. So I just wanted to remind you, one of the types of relationships that you can get in ecosystems is when organisms live together, and that's called symbiosis. And there are three ways that symbiosis can exist. And remember, we used happy faces when the organism benefited, sad faces when the organism was harmed by the relationship, and then straight across faces when the organism wasn't benefited but not harmed either. So in mutualism, both organisms benefit. Parasitism, one benefits, one is harmed. And then in commensalism, one benefits, the other doesn't really matter, doesn't care. That's not the only kind of relationship, though, in ecosystems. Another type is competition. And competition happens when two organisms are struggling for access to the same resource. Now, I use the term struggling and not fighting. Sometimes competition can result in fighting. It doesn't always result in fighting, okay? Sometimes it simply results in things that organisms do to, say, defend their territories and stuff like that. And it may just be, scent marking, taking resources and hiding them, things of that nature. It doesn't have to be a really dramatic thing, okay? Now, one of the most important relationships in ecosystem is the feeding relationships, okay? So these are trophic relationships, and the term troph means feed. And so there are what we call trophic or feeding levels in ecosystems. So here's a list of the trophic levels. So these are levels, and when we're talking about the level, we're talking about where does that fit on the food chain, okay? Now I have a sample picture here. I would probably flip this because we typically think of the first one as being the bottom of the food chain, the base of the food chain. And this is the primary producer level, okay, right here, primary producer. Primary producers are also called autotrophs, right, the self-feeders, the ones that can make their own food using photosynthesis or chemosynthesis. Again, topics that you've heard about before. So there's three different ways that this shows up on this picture. One is on the land, another is in a pond, and then here it is in the ocean, okay, algae, phytoplankton. So in the water, you're using some sort of algae or plankton as the base of your food chain. Now, the next group of organisms that you see here come in levels, and these are called heterotrophs, okay? Now, the first consumer, or heterotroph, because notice the heterotrophs are all consumers. They all have to eat others to survive. The first level, this one we call the herbivores, and I'm not going to try to spell that out because I'm going to run out of space. But that's our herbivores, right? That's how you learn that in elementary school. The rest of these are carnivores, okay? So these other levels are carnivores because they're eating other animals to survive. So here's our herbivore level right here. The rest of these are carnivore levels. There's actually two other groups of consumers out there. The decomposers, which eat dead things, right? Like your bacteria and your fungus in the ecosystem, and you just learned about that. And then you also have the omnivores, which can eat at multiple levels. Humans are categorized as omnivores because we would eat at the primary consumer level, right, when we eat plants. So when you have your salad, you're acting as a primary consumer. But if you have salad and, say, a hamburger, then you're also eating at the secondary consumer level because the cow is a primary consumer and you're eating that primary consumer, okay? So those are the trophic levels and their labels. All right, the previous slide showed you a series of food chains, and a food chain is a linear feeding relationship, okay, like this one here. Okay, there's a food chain. You've got this plant matter down at the bottom. being eaten by this bug, and this bug is being eaten by this spider. Energy transfers from here to here to here. Okay, that's a food chain. Okay, now the difference between a food chain and a food web is that food webs are multiple food chains that overlap. Notice this food chain is connected to this one, which is connected to this one, which is connected to this one, which is connected by this organism to this one here. Okay, so you start to look at this and you start to see a bunch of overlapping food chains, and we call overlapping food chains a food web. All right, now let's look at ecological pyramids, and to do this we need to look at a food chain. So let's look at this one, grass. Okay, the next level up is cow, and then maybe human. Okay, so there's a food chain, right? Grass, cow, human. What you have to understand is that the producers produce 100% of the energy. Okay, they have all of the energy, so they produce 100%. All right, the cow, when it eats the grass, only gets 10% of that energy. So a very small percentage of the energy actually goes to the humans. 90% of the energy is lost in that energy transfer as body heat to the cow. Okay, so the cow does not efficiently get the energy. It only utilizes 10%. The human only gets 1% of the energy when it eats the cow. Okay, so what you're seeing is you get a shrinking of energy from one level to the next to the next. And again, the other 90% here gets lost as body heat to the human. So you can actually construct what's called an ecological pyramid, demonstrating what happens to the energy as you move from trophic level to trophic level. Here's your 100% here. Notice the primary consumers, the herbivores, only get 10% of that. The primary carnivores get 10% of 10%, which is 1%. And then if you had another level, okay, say this human got eaten by a bear, okay. So the next level up, the bear would get 0.1%, okay. So poor unfortunate human got eaten, but that bear doesn't get very much energy. It gets 0.1%. So the energy that transfers is 10% of the level before it. 90% of the energy is lost. And so you get this pyramid structure of energy. This explains a couple of things. It explains, first of all, why you can have lots of producers in ecosystems but very few organisms at the top. Okay, the size of each trophic level decreases just as the energy decreases because there's not enough energy to support a whole bunch of top carnivores up here. The other thing this explains is why your food chains are limited in size. You're not going to get a food chain that's 10 links long, because by the time you get to that 10th organism, so much energy would be gone it wouldn't even be worth chasing the thing and killing it to try to eat it. So only 10% of the energy transfers, so you're only going to get 4, maybe 5 links in a food chain tops. All right, the last thing about feeding relationships that's important for you to understand is that there's a link, a connection between predators and prey. A lot of you understand that the predator needs the prey, right? Because predators have to eat the prey. So that makes sense, right? But what's interesting is prey also need the predator. And that's because the predator keeps the population of prey in check so that they don't get overpopulated and overcrowded in an area. What this graph is showing is kind of what the predator-prey graph that you did for homework is supposed to kind of show you. The lynx in blue is a cat. The hare is a rabbit. Okay, so the lynx, the blue line is the predator line, the red line is the prey line. And what you'll notice is when the predator line shoots up, the prey line drops, right? That causes a drop, obviously, in the predator population because there's not enough to eat. Once the predator drops, that's going to allow the prey population to rebound. And shortly after that, notice the predator population rebounds. So what you see on these graphs is these two populations respond to one another. And again, when you see a population drop in the hare, notice right after that the predator population drops. But once the predator population drops, then the prey goes up. Then the predator goes up. So they respond to each other on a graph. So you see graphs where usually what happens is the predator is just a step behind what the prey has done. And that kind of demonstrates their relationship to one another.